All right, all right. Happy Friday, everyone. I want to thank everyone for making it to the very end of our first ever Local Government Liberty Summit. I am James Quintero, and I lead the Think Local Liberty team here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Thank you, thank you. I want to welcome you guys to our final panel today, the new local government landscape. And to help me kind of sort through this mess, I've asked two of the brightest minds in Texas who are over here sitting to my left. But before we get to them, I just want to take a moment and say thank you. This event could not have happened without someone very special. She has superhuman patience, and she did all of the work to put this together. If you would, please help me thank our brilliant events coordinator, Olivia White. Thank you. So with that said, let me introduce our two very gracious local government gurus. To my immediate left, I have State Representative Kyle Biederman, who is the representative from Texas House District 73. He is an owner and operator of Ace Hardware in Fredericksburg, Texas, which is an absolutely beautiful part of the country. And him and his wife, Barbie, have been together for 30 years. And importantly, he is a member of the newly formed House Freedom Caucus, which I followed with great interest and intrigue all session long.
Thank you.
Sitting to Representative Biederman's left is a very good friend of mine who I have been bothering on public pensions for a long time now. He's helped me craft some great messages and strategies to attack this issue of public pension reform, which I think I want to get to a little later. But of course, he needs no introduction, but Dennis Calabrese is the president of Dennis Calabrese Company. He is a very well-known communications consultant and public relations expert, and of course, a graduate of Rice University. Please help me welcome Mr. Dennis Calabrese. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. Let me start here. Is there a new local government landscape emerging in Texas, or did I completely blunder in naming this panel?
I'll let you go first.
If we say no, can we leave?
That's right. Well, actually, I'll start off. There is a new landscape for me. Since this is my first session, it is totally new landscape. Here I'm from Fredericksburg, Texas, small town, but a very strong local government because we are a very fast-growing city, not necessarily in population, but in business, tourism, wineries, all those things. So this is a brand new landscape for me, but I know more of what you're trying to ask. There is a brand new landscape, and I believe a lot of it has to do with cities like Austin that are starting to do more and more and want more control and more regulation over people's lives, and that is starting to spread throughout Texas. And so I believe there is a new landscape, and I feel it during the legislative session, and I feel it when I go home. I was good friends with my city managers and all of the council members and all the people back in Fredericksburg for 32 years. I've had my business there 32 years. But I could feel a huge difference when I got elected. And that probably is the beginning of a different type of landscape, especially for a legislator, if you're not going to be just a yes man for all the things that they want to do. So.
And in terms of that kind of pressure emanating from the local level, I mean, is it difficult to get the point across that the role of government, at least at the local level, has in some cases exceeded its boundaries? Is that something that more resonates, would you say, with your constituents as opposed to the local elected officials? Not to get you in trouble, by the way.
Well, I live in a fast growth area, whether it's Fredericksburg, Gillespie County, Bernie is my district, in Kendall County, just outside San Antonio, and New Braunfels. So I'm in one of the fastest growing areas of the state of Texas. And with that growth, as we heard in the last session, comes a lot of extra income, a lot of extra revenue from new people moving in, and of course, property values, property taxes, sales tax, all those things. So you definitely feel a difference for that reason in my district, where they are getting more and more money, more and more power. And what I see even more than anything is my smaller cities wanting to be more like the bigger cities. So Bernie wants to have a big event center. There's a big giant event center. New Braunfels wants to have 3 or 4 event centers, it seems. Fredericksburg now wants their convention center. And they want to, it's like, keeping up with the Joneses. So I feel that tension as I drive through my district every day.
Dennis, what say you? Is there a new local government landscape that's emerging, or is that a fiction of a figment of my imagination?
No, I agree with both of you. There is a change going on, and it's not one actual thing. There's a lot of elements to it. One should be obvious to everyone. There is a politicization of almost everything in society. TV shows, movies, everything is becoming politicized. It's a platform for making statements. And in the old days, when I first got started in politics, people ran for city council, ran for mayor to kind of do the business of the city and then move on, and somebody else would do it. And it was really more of a functionary role. And when you go back to the Reagan era, I remember they would go to city council and they would pass an ordinance for a nuclear freeze, because they really want to just make a statement, but it had no force of law. It was just got it out of their system, right? That's about as political as it got. And then life went on. Today, they're actually passing stuff that actually does stuff. It's not a gesture. It is, raising minimum wages, or, actual policies that you actually have to go fight. And they're not just making statements anymore. They're using local government as a platform to express an ideology, a philosophy. And they're doing it partially because they believe the philosophy, and partially is to pick a fight. They want to fight about it. They want to make a point. They want to expose the people who are against that. And that platform of having a fight on the municipal level is very attractive to people with that philosophy. And when you think about somebody with a more liberty-oriented philosophy, we just kind of want to be left alone. Like, just cut the trash and, have water come out of the faucet and, have some cops around. But, otherwise, let's not. So we're not as interested in that, right? We just want to go about our business. But that is an irresistible platform. Now, there's a lot more going on. And a lot of it is this keeping up with the Joneses and cities competing with each other, and competing for economic development, trying to get Jeff Bezos to move his operation there. So it's multifaceted, but the one that fascinates me is just the pure politicization of local government. And every city councilman in the old days just wanted to be a city councilman. Now every city councilman wants to be governor. And so they're all thinking about, okay, what can I craft to say that I did here that will win me the primary? I mean, really, this is how they think. And it's, it's a little bit disappointing if you live in a city and you just want them to, pick up the trash, guys.
Well, that is definitely true. When you look at the city councils and mayors and so forth, those are supposedly nonpartisan races. You don't I said supposedly. So they don't declare. So what happens? And not very many people vote in those races. So we're getting a much more liberal people in those positions versus the state of Texas. You look at the state of Texas, there has not been a Democrat elected to a statewide office for 23 years, not one. So when you look at the whole state of Texas, the only place really for this growth in liberal thought is in our local municipalities. And so they are getting information from somewhere. I mean, a lot of times it's not that they've been just making it up themselves. There is pressure put on them or information given to them that is allowing them or having them make these decisions. And, we've heard the term Agenda 21, things like that. That has been infiltrated into the local governments. And so that's where a lot of this information comes from. And of course, it sounds really good, but I never thought of how you said that they're actually using that because they want to expose people like myself, or expose the grassroots that may come to their office and say, I'm not happy with this.
Of course, and I'll backing that point up, I want to give you a statistic. How many government employees do you think there are in the United States, federal, state, and local level, approximately? 22 million. This is a pretty good guess. How many of those are local versus state and federal? 14 of the 22. It's only 3 million federal employees. 2 million at the IRS, I'm sure, but 14 of 22 are local. Who's giving them the information? The employee unions, of course, because they have that's where the money is. They have the vested interest in those operations. So this is look, I like to, people ask me what I do. I say, I fight the status quo. That's all I do. I go find systems that are broken. I try to fix it. And status quos are brilliant at defending themselves. This is what they're great at. And you can look at any system. This is what TPPF does for a living. You fight the status quo. How do I fix the education system or the healthcare system or the tax system? The status quo of employee unions is masterful. Look at the teachers' unions. But at the city level, they're more brilliant, because they actually kind of fly under the radar. Massive employment at the city level, massive overemployment at the city level, lifetime jobs, almost no scrutiny. When's the last time somebody went and audited the public works department in a major city in America? They do anything they want. So it's kind of under our noses this is happening, and I'm saying that their activism has now made them more obvious, and now the attention is coming backwards, saying, well, what is going on over there? And I do think it warrants all of our attentions about how cities are run, how the governance is run, and how efficient they are. And hopefully later on we can get into maybe some specific ideas on that, but I think it's important. Somebody already has a question. I don't know if you're doing questions.
So we're going to do a Q&A section towards the end of the program, but going back to this issue of growing city bureaucracies, I think one of the best the best way I've ever heard the issue framed is Governor Abbott's comment about 3 years ago now, where he talked about the Californization of Texas. And I thought that so crystallized the challenge that we faced at the local level. Is that something that you think is happening? Are we in danger here in Texas of being Californianized?
I think my complaint is that we don't know, because we have never had enough scrutiny on the municipal level. Are we overstaffed, understaffed, or perfect in most municipal departments and cities? I'm just telling you we don't know. And there's not an easy way to find out unless you have a really entrepreneurial mayor who comes in and says, I'm going to go look at this stuff. So to be honest with you, I don't know. I do know some surface evidence. So in Houston, I don't have this stat memorized yet, but it's something like in the last 13 years, the police department budget doubled, and we have no new police on the street. We have not increased the number of police at all, but we doubled the department budget. Does that prove something? No. Maybe they got the most awesome equipment I've, and they don't need police, humans to do it. I don't know. I'm just saying that doesn't sound good, but there's no scrutiny. You can't go in there and do that study to figure out what's going on. I know a lot of that is pensions, which we'll talk about later, but I'm just saying that it's not transparent, and so it could be going on to an extreme level, or it might be at a moderate level. My issue is we don't know, and I think that's a big red flag.
Well, the other thing, TML, I'm sure, is giving cities, this is how many employees you should have for this size of government, for this number of population, for this square miles. And so they compare against each other saying, oh, well, we are right in line with what we should have compared to the other cities. but the standard is set by themselves, by TML. It's the same thing with the public school system. You ask the administration, how many administrators should you have in this school? Well, we're right in line. Our averages are right in line with what the TEA or someone else tells them. Does that mean that's what you need in your school? No, that just means you're comparing yourself to all the other schools that this other organization, in their best interest, is telling you is a good way to have it. It's totally different from business. Business, you look at it and you decide how's the best way, the most efficient and effective way, especially when you're talking about other people's money. In business, you're talking about your own money. But what's the most effective way to run this operation? But that's not how it is with these government agencies.
But of course, as a state representative, and I'm sure you encounter this argument often, is if we at the state level, behind a conservative framework, implement or try to implement some of these reforms, and we're of course accused of trying to intrude upon local governments. What are your thoughts on the proper role of the state legislature in local affairs?
Well, I truly believe that these local municipalities think that we serve them, not the people. We represent the same constituency as they do. So when I meet with my city councils and my commissioners and my judge and mayor and so forth, I just tell them, we have the same constituency. We have the same people that we represent. So we should have some similarities in what we feel are the priorities. But we don't have the same priorities because they feel that we represent them. And then if we try to tell them what to do, then they think that we're encroaching on their ability to operate their city. And of course, then they'll say, well, if the people aren't happy, they can vote us out. And the problem is that's true. But the problem is people don't vote in those elections very much. It takes very little to win those elections. And so you're not getting a representation. So I tell them, well, my constituents are much greater in number than yours. So when I hear from the constituents, I'm hearing from a greater number. So you should really be considering what I'm hearing. But, they don't think of it that way. Mm-hmm. And that's a tough one to overcome.
Dennis, what do you think about this conversation about the state legislature and local affairs?
Well, I have a little bit of a different view of most people on this issue. And although I have a personal view on it, my public view is that we have never really, as a state, as most states have not, had a good debate and a division of responsibilities between the state and the cities. Because we really haven't had to. It's generally been in concert, right? Especially in a state like Texas. So we've been generally conservative, generally try to do things in a fiscally conservative way, both the state and the city. So as the cities exert more independence and start to do things that are not consistent with what the statewide policies are, then it starts to be a conflict. And you shouldn't come down on the side of whoever you agree with philosophically on that issue to decide that. You should decide what cities get to decide and not. To give you an example from the pension world, there's 200 and something pensions in Texas, and 13 of them are controlled by Austin. And the rest of them are controlled by the county or the city. And the 13 that are controlled by Austin are all the big cities. And those 13 account for 55% of all pension debt in Texas. So the state control was given to the state as a defense mechanism against reform, against being able to fix it. I advocated for local control for the 13. A lot of conservatives fought me and said, why would you give it back to a liberal city? We don't trust them. And I said, well, first of all, you've messed it up. It's been in the state. So if you want to wake up and fix it, that's okay. But second of all, if I have it in the city, I can actually go with a referendum, put it on the ballot, and go pass it. I don't care what the mayor and city council, I'll pass every one of those. I passed pension reform in San Diego and San Jose, who voted for Obama, and 60 and 66% respectively. And I passed pension reform by 70% victory in a 66% Obama city on the ballot. You don't think I can do that in Houston? So, but conservatives said, no, don't give it back to a liberal city. I'm saying that our state has never really had that debate about what should be the city's powers and the state's powers. What we've done is said, if the city does something liberal, I'll fight it. If they do something conservative, I'll let them have it. And as much as I might like that outcome, I don't like that reasoning. So, people can have their own views, but I think it's true that we haven't, as a state and municipalities, drawn the clear lines on what the authority is. And you see it playing out now with the war on the cities and this kind of debate. All that reflects is not only a disagreement on philosophy, but a non-resolution of the division of authority between the states and the cities. So I love what you're doing, because we need to have a debate about it and figure it out, and not be decided on, oh, well, if you get a new mayor, I'll let you keep the power. Well, come on, that's not how we should do things. We should actually have something that outlasts the people in the offices. We need to have an actual philosophy.
Well, I like that, because being a legislator, we don't talk about those things very much. We may get a bill down for us to vote on, but we never spoke about what the responsibility should be. And I think, actually, I'm on the committee for county affairs. And so I deal a lot with Texas Association of Counties and, of course, TML. And I want to have in my charge for in between is to talk this exact, and I already made that known, because we don't really talk about what the separation and what the duties and what their priorities and what the proper role of the governments are. We just get bills given to us, and I'm sure a lot from these lobbyists. And, then it's like, vote on this, and that's how you're going to make your decision. And then we fight over it because, we don't want to give away powers to some of the cities and so forth, but we don't even know what powers they should have. And again, I like the part where you said, even if it's conservative, okay, let them have it. Then it makes it look like we're, picking winners and losers, without even having a lot of the facts that we need. So, I would love to get with you after this. You can help me out on some of the things I'll be doing in the interim.
Be happy to.
Dennis, real quick, I want to go back to this issue of local pension control, because I've always found it to be such an enormous hypocrisy among those at the local level, where they're so very vocal about their need and desire to retain local control. But when it comes to one of the biggest budget items that they deal with at the local level, pensions, they don't want anything to do with it. They're happy and content to have the state oversee and manage that area. And in your experience, have you ever come across an official who's tried and successfully justified this position, or is it just a big hypocrisy?
Well, both. They justify it, and it is hypocrisy. So they don't properly justify it. But when you think about it, so these 13 plans, so 3 of those 13 are in Houston: the police, the fire, and the municipal employees. So those employees are employees of the city, so they have a contract between the city and the employees, and they can negotiate their salary directly, and they can negotiate their health care benefits directly, but their pension benefits are decided in Austin. And think about how odd that is, just for starters. So a state rep from Fredericksburg can vote on how much pension a Houston cop gets. Now, I'm not sure what his incentive is to decide what that should be. I don't know how he would decide what the right number is. People would come in and say, this is the right number. If I was from a city near Houston, I would actually try to mess it up so I could get an advantage in hiring. I mean, theoretically, you would have an incentive not to help them if you were right outside of Houston, because they compete for cops. In fact, most of our cops live in those other cities, and they work in Houston. They don't even live in Houston. So just for starters, it's ridiculous that we're asking people that have no connection to an area to decide on one piece of one benefit for a really important group of people. But I'm saying it was done purely to make it much harder for people like me to ultimately fix. It was a defense mechanism. By the way, this is not just the case in Texas. Illinois happens to have this. And if you'll talk to Mayor Rahm Emanuel in Chicago, he will tell you that 10 years ago, 20% of his budget went to pensions. The entire city budget went to pensions. It's the same as in Houston today. 20% of my hometown's budget goes to pensions. One out of every $5. In Chicago today, guess what it is? 55. Think about being a mayor of the city and 55% of every dollar in your budget goes to pensions. That's all you have, 45 left to run the entire city of Chicago. You wonder why Chicago's in trouble? Rahm Emanuel, of all people, tried to fix his problem. They ran from the left against him for mayor. They were so mad. Rahm Emanuel was not left enough for the Democrats in Chicago, and they ran against him. Now, they didn't beat him, but they hurt him badly. So, of course, he had to raise taxes $500,000. He laid off 1,000 teachers, did all this horrible stuff to get through a single budget cycle because Springfield, the state legislature, will not change the pension system. So this is a design strategy to not let people fix pensions. The ultimate irony of this is that fixing the pensions is in the interest of the members of the union. Not the leadership, but the rank and file are the ones that are going to suffer for the misrepresentations of it's not as bad as they say, everything's fine. We're going to get 8.5% return forever, don't worry about it. Those are the rank and file are going to suffer. So in answer to your question, no, I've never seen in all the years working on policy, and I'm old, many years, I have never seen an issue quite like this where there is a really small group of people that are hurting both their own members and the taxpayers simultaneously in service of holding on to power and the benefits that come from running $1 billion pension system. You fly to the Bahamas and on the nickel of the investment bankers or whatever. It's extraordinary. But I have to tell you, since we're in a municipal panel today, this is the single biggest economic threat to cities in the United States. Nothing, I don't even know what's in second. The pensions will cripple American cities. They already are crippling. When I first got into politics, municipal bankruptcy was a concept that no one had ever heard of because cities don't go bankrupt. We've had 55 municipal bankruptcies, not just Detroit. We've had 55 municipal bankruptcies. There are lawyers that specialize in municipal bankruptcy. It's like, that's weird. I mean, how do you do a living on that? There's plenty on the way. And I will tell you, the teacher pensions and the state employee pensions are next. All the states and all the states have the same problems that the cities have. They're just a little bit behind. So, if you really want to know the threat to cities, I mean, they can play these games, power games, if they want. My city, even after the great pension deal, is still at least $8 billion in pension debt and will not get out of it anytime soon. And it still will likely cripple Houston in the future.
Help us out then. What are some solutions?
Well, we have the solutions, and in fact, we are plotting to do something about the state employees and the teachers in Texas, because those plans are in bad need of repair. The sooner you get in and repair them, the less you have to take anything that you promise someone. So the earlier you get in, you can just change it for the new people who, by the way, young people are happy to get 401ks that are portable because they change jobs more often. It's actually a much easier fix the earlier you get in. The later you wait, like a Chicago, you actually have to go to people and say, hey, I know they promised you this, but you're not getting that. And surprisingly, not too many politicians like to do that.
One of the reasons why I think we do have a new local government landscape emerging in some sense is that you have increased attention from the top statewides. And of course, as you've already said, Mayor Adler called it a war on cities. I would argue that it's a war for individual rights. And you had a lot of really big issues come before the legislature in the special session setting, two of which were property taxes and annexation, two issues which I know you know well, being part of the Freedom Caucus. Is it your sense of things that in this new paradigm, we're going to see big changes like that continue to come before the legislature?
Well, it needs to, because it's really a war on the taxpayer. It's a war on freedom. It's a war on liberty, a war on private property rights. And so if the cities are not going to respect those basic things, then the state has to step in. And that's what we see happening with annexation, property tax reform or property tax relief. But so many more when it came to Uber, when it came to other things that the city is doing, ride sharing, short-term rentals, on and on and on. I mean, we're seeing them pop out of the woodwork every couple of months. There's a new one. And so if we're not there as a state to protect private property rights and protect the taxpayer, then who is? Because the cities and counties are out for themselves. So that's why we see that happening more and more. And again, they're getting more and more power. And as they see some rogue cities get away with some things, and the other cities want to do the same thing. But a lot of it's because, what you were saying, they're in trouble. You know, we are in debt. So much local debt is just skyrocketing in Texas, which is so sad. And so with all that debt, these cities are finding other ways to grab power. And that's what I see.
So I have to ask this, mostly because my wife wants me to. Do you think, given that property tax reform didn't make it successfully out of the legislature, are we likely to see another second special session on that issue? Or is that something that's perhaps going to be a focus of the next 2019 session?
So should I be totally honest?
Please do.
We will not have another session,
Yeah.
certainly on property tax reform. And I think we all know it will never get to the House or the floor of the Senate, of the House. It'll never get to the House on the floor, floor of the House, because of our Speaker and leadership. So there's no reason to even bring it back. But that's not even really the biggest issue. We're still going around the edges. We have got to fix school finance. We've got to fix the biggest problem we have with property tax, and whether that's the best way to fund certain things. And I love those cities that are not even charging property tax. I talked to my cities, and of course they just, went ballistic, thinking, oh, that could never happen. And then I started naming off some of the cities, and of course everything got quiet, and some of the people that were in the audience were listening and, going, wow, we never thought of that. I think that's really what a lot of it is. A lot of us, even in the legislature, have never thought that, well, a city doesn't have to have property tax. Or there's certain things that have just been happening for so long that we get used to it, and we just kind of get in that comfort zone. But until we tackle the pensions, until we tackle school finance, and some of these big issues that are sucking up so much money, property tax reform is really, it's going to be difficult to really make anything that's going to save people a lot of money.
One of the big changes that I'm curious to see how it all plays out is of course the legislature passed a modified annexation reform. So if you live basically around a big city in Texas, then beginning December 1, you have the ability to vote on whether or not to be annexed. And TPPF is going to be working to expand some of that. But where I think it's going to be particularly interesting on the property tax issue is you've had big cities for a long time using their annexation powers to go out there and grab revenue-rich suburbs and funnel that money back into the urban core. That's no longer going to be an option, I think. And so it's going to be, you're either going to have to find efficiencies within the city, you're going to have to raise property taxes, you're going to have to use debt to do some more innovative things. Dennis, is that kind of what you see evolving as well?
Look, they're annexing and doing all that. I mean, that's how hungry they are for money. They're not waiting around. I do agree with you though but when you squeeze one end, it comes out the other end, and so they're going to try to chase the money. That's why I think ultimately you can't, on that side of the equation, you have to look at how the money is being spent, because they always start with whatever they have today and say, do you want more cops? Do you want more parks? And do you want potholes filled? Yes, I want that. Okay, I need this much more money. You start at that, and then we say no. And then, oh, well, you're against more cops? Well, but we already doubled your budget. Well, I know, but here we are. You want more cops? I need more money. You know, what do you want me to take away? Name it. Tell me, what are your cuts? I mean, this is the old fight, right? As long as we agree to those terms, we lose. They're going to get the money because people want more cops. They want more potholes. They want more parks. Ultimately, on the property tax thing, I don't even think what is being proposed is property tax reform. Property tax reform is to abolish the property tax and expand the sales tax. We shouldn't have a property tax. And I love that's an applause line. It's really hard to do and really complicated, and it's great when I can just say it. I don't know if you know the old story about the general who'd never been out in the battlefield, and he points to the map and he puts his finger here and he goes, "We're going to cross the river here." And the colonel, who's bloodied up and been out in battle, said, "If only your finger were a bridge." So that's kind of how I feel when I say that. Yeah, we'll just do that. But the property tax is an incredibly inefficient, terrible way to tax people. Since you clapped, you already know, so I'm not going to go through why. But ultimately, that's what we should be working toward, to get rid of this thing, because otherwise it's just deck chairs being rearranged on a thing that's really expensive and really inefficient and unfair. Unfair to poor people almost more than anybody. Renters, totally hidden tax, can do anything they want with it. So, and then the other issue that really disappoints and concerns me is that we have a complete, I don't want to exaggerate, we have a nearly complete inadequacy of economic literacy on city councils. Yeah. And what I mean by that is we have people voting on bonds that do not know what a bond is, do not know what it will do, how it will do it, how it's repaid, what the consequences are. This happens every day. We have people voting on pensions. It took me, I don't know, a year and a half to understand it. I'm a little slow, but I mean, I talk to people in the legislature, let alone the city councils who are voting for this stuff, who literally do not understand the first steps of this. And so they're easily manipulated because they want cops and they want potholes filled really bad because their constituents are on them. So we have a system that has a really bad incentive loop in it that rewards people going to do things that in the long run are really damaging and in the short run look good, and then they all come due, and then whoever's in there at the time gets hit with it. That's why literally a Rahm Emanuel, who looks like one of the most liberal people we've ever met, is going to war with his unions because he just doesn't want the city to literally go down. And this is decades of people making bad short-term decisions who didn't understand the consequences. Chicago's my favorite. It's more my favorite than California. Chicago sold their parking meters. An infinite source of revenue forever, and they sold them to a private company, I think for 20 or 30 years. Somebody else owns it, so they could get a one-time payment to make it through their budget cycle. Really? I thought parking meters was always the greatest government scam ever. Like, they charge you just to pull up and park, and they get the money. It's so awesome. They sold those things. Who makes these decisions? So, again, I don't know. You know, we need to understand that the people making these really horrific decisions that are leading into this are being led into this relatively blindly. I think this is something that citizens could actually take control of. I mean, you guys ought to either go run for city council or get your city council people educated on basic economics of public finance. And, you know, otherwise they're just too easily led to do really damaging things. And I'm telling you, when you vote for a pension that guarantees an 8.5% return no matter what the money does, you know, for an infinite time horizon, it's essentially fraud. That is not going to happen, and everybody knows it. And you cannot produce me an expert that would back that up, and they all do it routinely every day.
Well, I got something real quick. Talk about replacing property tax with a consumption tax. So during the special session, Representative Darby actually came out with a bill saying we want to get rid of property tax for public schools given 5 years from now. And so that would force us to replace it with something else, put the gun to our head. I have no problem with that whatsoever. And really the only choice would be basically a consumption tax. The only problem I have is until we fix the spending problem on the school system and the spending in other areas, we're going to have a great source of income by the taxpayer again for more waste. So that's why it's so important that we fix
It
the
has to
spending
be done at
side.
the same time. There's no question about that. I would only do one in tandem with the other. But what I was just commenting on is you can't talk about property tax reform. That's like, Titanic reform, right? It's going down. It's bad. It'll never be good, right? So let's do it the right way, and at the same time, you're right. Let's fix what it's designed to fund at the same time.
So, going back to this issue of getting citizens engaged in what they can do, of course, running for office and supporting candidates and whatnot, but isn't there a third option? Isn't there a way where perhaps some folks could contribute to more of a study of how these dollars are being spent?
Well, no question. There's not just two or three. There's
Sure.
lots of ways, but there's no question, and I'm working on this right now, as you know, a game plan so that citizens can ask for transparency into municipal government. And it's ironic that we have to ask for it since it's ours, it's not theirs, but they don't want to let us look at that stuff. So in my city of Houston, we had a previous liberal mayor that published a 1,200-page budget, and my current liberal mayor published an 800-page budget, and all they did was take out all the detail of where the money was being spent. So in one way, I'm glad I only have to read 800 pages. However, now I can't know where a lot of the money is flowing. And I have no doubt this is purposeful. This is my money and all my neighbors' money. And if we asked to go get the 400 pages, we couldn't. They would not give them to us. They probably don't even keep them. So, look, you're exactly right. I think one of the most powerful things we could do is demand transparency in city government, because what you will find there will, I think they'll all lose next election because it'll be so bad. When we pulled over the covers of the pensions, what we found there was extraordinary. It was I don't know. I don't really have the words for it. What you'll find in these city departments, I think, at least in the major cities, is going to be just as horrific. Anytime somebody asks for a tax increase because they need to fund X, the first response would say, you should have, in my opinion, is, I will support your tax increase as soon as I know where all the current money I give you is being spent. Is that fair? I'll give you more money if you need it. I'll give you less money if you're overspending. I'll give you the same money if everything's cool. Shouldn't that be our first response?
I agree, and I gave that to my city council and my city manager. The thing that would help us a lot is specifics on what to look for. That's what's hard for regular taxpayers or normal people. We can approach our city and county and ask for that information, but just like you said, you're going to get a budget that may not have detail, or how are we going to understand?
Okay, so I got that solved for you. So is anybody old enough to remember Ronald Reagan here? Okay. So there was a
Never forget him.
There was a guy around. This is what Reagan did. Think about going into the federal government with this problem. Like, oh my gosh. So this is what Reagan did. Reagan called up a guy named Peter Grace. He was a businessman in Chicago. He's a Democrat, which was brilliant. And he said, will you get a bunch of business people who know about stuff like finance and human resources and billing and efficiency, and will you come into the federal government and go through every department and find waste and inefficiency? And this guy said, yeah, I'll do it. And they called it the Grace Commission. And they produced a report. You can go Google it. It's huge volume. And they produced thousands of recommendations. And like the Freedom Caucus in Texas, there was a Grace Caucus in the United States Congress that formed. A bunch of Texans were on it. And they systematically went through the Grace Commission and started passing as legislation a lot of the recommendations. Some of them could be done administratively by the department, so Reagan ordered it done, and some of them had to be passed by Congress. And they did it at the cost of the private sector because these people were donated. So one thing you could do is you could go to the private sector and say, hey, help us go clean up these departments. Now, I will tell you that in the major cities, they're going to say no, which I love. Because we're going to say, wait, you won't let us look at what we're funding? We can't look like at the billing and if you're staffed appropriately? Because that's their first reaction, is that no, we can't see that. That's why that thing is 800 pages and not 1,200 pages. So just them refusing, I think, is going to change this dynamic of the cities trying to make statements and draw enemies out and do all this stuff. All of a sudden, it's like, wait a minute, we're already giving you all this stuff. Why should we start with that as the baseline? That doesn't make sense. The baseline is what it actually should be. So I think that there is a way to skin that cat, because that's what they do say, and the expertise is out there. And I think this could easily become a good statewide movement. Because my response to needing more money is, tell me where my current money is going. And I will tell you, nobody knows that, and that's not right.
By the way, in that vein, the Austin City Auditor just recently released a new report looking at construction expenses in the city of Austin, because, of course, as we know, the city of Austin is notorious for saying that a project will cost $1 million, and of course it actually costs $10 million. Well, when they got to looking at some of the details of these projects, they noticed something funny, that the city would put forward an amount, and then you would have lots of purchase orders come in once that project had been approved. Of course, nobody wants to stop a project once it's midstream. And one of a lot of the auditors' report identified a misuse of funds. So, for example, some lucky City of Austin executive got a $35,000 custom wood pecan table based on one of these purchase orders. And so I'm sure as you start digging into these numbers, you're going to find that there's a lot of waste. Now, we just have about 10 minutes left. Why don't we transition now into the question and answer portion? If we would, we've got a gentleman back here, and we'll get you a mic here in just a second. And don't be gentle.
Well, there's not enough time to really go into all of the subjects, but the spending is an issue. We as citizens, and there's more in this room that I know also, we go to government, city and county, and ask for this detail, and they always quote state statutes on why they don't have to provide it. So we need our legislators to go remove those barriers to transparency. Then we can get to zero-based budgeting and justify what's actually being spent. But we also have to look at what our enemies are too, and you go look at International Council of Codes, where Unified Development Codes come from, International Fire Codes, and you look at the models that we're trying to be forced into internationally. You look at the European model, where you've got city-states and just a federal government, and you come over here and look at Council of Governments. All of our intermediate sovereignties, checks and balances, fences are being destroyed and torn down. Public-private partnerships, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the list goes on and on. So we're discussing a lot of symptoms. We also have to go find a cure for what's causing these problems. And even on something as simple as charity, when you go to state statutes, it's written into our state statutes that you can't be a charity in Texas unless you're compliant with federal IRS code. We got so many places that need to be fixed. In order to get to these things you're suggesting, we got to remove the barriers that keep us from getting there.
Well, we would be very happy, but we'd have to know what they are. Again, a lot of people think that legislators know everything. Well, almost. But I know my office, we would love, in fact, right back behind here is Mackenzie Taylor, and she would be happy to start taking information, and those are the kind of things that we would like to have legislation on. Because I'm taking my group of people in Fredericksburg to City Council. We're forming a group to get this information, and I'll be standing there with them so that they can't say no. And if they do say no and they tell me it's the state, well, then I'll find out the information so I can change that law. But that's a joy, to go with taxpayers to your local municipality and stand there and listen and see what they say. Because when the state legislator's standing there, they don't give you the same answer as they do when you're by yourself. And it's really nice to see. But yes, I would be happy to help any way I can. But we need your help to get that information to us.
Dennis, isn't that one of the beauties of the efforts that you're leading, is that you don't necessarily need any kind of legislative action? It can be done locally?
Well, there's lots of ways to skin this cat. One is, the one I like the most is just to go in politely and ask for it, but do it in a very public way and let them refuse. And then show some examples and say, well, but look at this stuff. We need to go see this. And let them refuse long enough and hard enough. Then you could go put it on the ballot by petition and say, okay, well, we'll do it this way. You know, we ask nicely. You won't show us where our money's going. If there are some legal barriers, then we'll go to the Attorney General, go to the legislature and say, fine, if you're going to force us to do it this way, we will. But they're doing this in front of the citizens. And I would just go run a slate against everybody next time and say, the people that are keeping this information from you ought to be defeated. And we'll go and see what's inside of our own departments, right? So you could also pass a state law. I'm sure governor would be interested in passing a state law requiring disclosure of that, you know, because if they're going to accuse him of war, he might as well start one, right? So, so yeah, you guys got to open all your books. How about that?
Well, the thing again that I say those same things to my municipalities. I have 3 of them. Actually, I got 6 of them, but three of the bigger ones. And they say, oh, we're so transparent. It's all on our website. Everything's there. You could see everything. And the problem then comes, what do we look at that we're not seeing, or how do we know we're not seeing everything?
You need the
That's
expertise.
where we need the help.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, sir.
Question for Mr. Calabrese. One of the questions, you know, you mentioned the $8 billion that City of Houston owes on its pension liabilities, all right? The liability stream comes in as interest rates go up. Where is there, what interest rate do you need to match that or whatever?
So the city says right now that their liability is $8 billion at 7% interest rates. So they're saying I can get 7% forever in my investments, and then it's $8 billion. So if they get 6%, it's something like 13. You know, you miss a little. You know, it's not arithmetic; it's geometric. So, and by the way, they've been getting about 1 lately. You know, but they'll catch up because it's infinite timeline. We'll be here forever. You know, they have all these bizarre, you know, excuses, right? So the big pension bill this time that solved Houston's problem, this is what it did. The unions gave $2.5 billion in concessions, which they're prepared to give much more than that because the things were broke, and in return for $1 billion in cash for bonds. So we got $1.5 billion total benefit off of what I say is probably about a $12 billion problem if you were close to honest on the interest rates, right? So that's $10.5 billion. I'll even be generous and I'll say we got a $10 billion problem. This is after the massive reforms that everybody worked so hard and took all the credit for. We're $10 billion in the hole. And let me just tell you that when the cities and the pension funds get together, they're supposed to be somewhat adversarial, right? Trying to negotiate hard. The cities agree with the unions to not fund in return for higher benefits. Think about this for a minute. This is how these things get bad so fast. So, by the way, Chris Christie did this. This is not a Democrat-only problem, because even Republicans don't want to fund their pensions. They want to use the money for other stuff, and the Republicans don't like the unions anyway. So Christie says, I'm not going to pay you because you won't fix your pension. So they get more underfunded. Well, he has to pay it. But more deviously, in cities like Houston, the mayor goes to the pensions and say, hey, I'm a little short this year. How about if I don't pay in, but I'll increase your COLAs and reduce your retirement age? Well, there's a cost to that. The city council approves that without having any idea what the cost is. Goes back to my economic literacy. And they go, that sounds like a great deal. We get to keep the money. And then we're $10 billion in the hole. And if you're in Dallas, you actually go broke. You know, the pension just has no more money. So this is the kind of negative incentives that are buried in all these systems.
Yes, sir. Why don't we head up this side of the room? We've got time for probably about 2 more questions.
I'm just wondering if you can enlighten us as to how the private sector figured this out more than a decade ago. They flipped from defined benefit to defined contribution, and the public sector is completely out of step here?
Because it's the private sector, I guess. I mean, so they switched to defined contributions, essentially 401k style plans. One interesting reason is because the federal government, so some companies were underfunding their pensions like the cities and the states. And lo and behold, the federal government jumped in and said, whoa, 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 don't be underfunding those pensions. Not to the cities and states. They only said this to the companies. And they said, don't underfund those pensions. Those are employees. They need their retirement. And so the companies were like, well, if we're going to promise a return and have to fully fund and can't play any of the games moving the money around, we probably ought to go to a risk-free system for us, which is we pay, and then they own the money. They also liked it because of the portability. Again, we haven't talked about this, but these long vesting periods in the public plans are really devious and bad for employees. So you find teachers that should have stopped teaching 15 years ago, they don't like it. They're bad teachers because they're unhappy all the time, but they're there because they got to vest their pensions. And they do this with firemen and policemen. They make long vesting periods to trap them in these plans. Well, 401ks are portable, and you just leave when you want to leave. And companies saw the benefits of that both financially and from a workforce. But ironically, Congress didn't allow companies to do what they allow cities and states to do routinely, and it's because of the powers of the union. So yes, companies, 90-something% of them have defined contribution programs, and municipal and federal and state employees generally are exactly the reverse.
Yes, sir. A mic right here.
You know, after listening all afternoon, I'm beginning to think we need a conservative Saul Alinsky. Maybe you can do that, James. Maybe I know TPPF is a 501c3 organization, so I guess you guys are obviously working and doing a lot of good work on doing the research that I guess the people our friends on the left are doing, and I guess maybe that's what we need looking forward, is to get more conservative people working as community organizers, quote unquote, on the local level.
Well, I'm just a pretty face. Brian over here actually does all the work. So, but you're right. We launched our local government center about 4 years ago. I think recognizing that a lot of the stuff we were doing at the state level was being counteracted locally, and so we wanted to begin to have a presence in the local sphere. And I tell you, for all the bad stuff that's happening locally, you're starting to see the conservative movement as a whole begin to really shift its attention to what's happening locally. Me personally, I've written off federal government reform, and so the most important stuff that's happening is happening at the state and local level. Gentlemen, one last quick question, because I'm the moderator. If you would get out your crystal ball and opine a little bit on maybe the 2 or 3 local government issues that you see on the horizon that are maybe addressed in the next legislature, or the legislature thereafter. Are there any big pressing issues that you're going to see emerge in the next couple of legislative sessions?
That will emerge, or that we wish would emerge?
Maybe a little bit of both.
I mean, when you talk about the legislature, you're talking about big issues don't get spoken about. That's the problem. The big thing is just get little Band-Aids and so forth. I don't have anything like that in mind right now, except the fact that we have to continue to expose the hypocrisy. And we need to address the 2 biggest issues: pensions, school finance. Because locally, all you hear, or all I hear from our cities and our counties, it's all the school, it's all the schools, it's all the schools. Well, that's part of that. But we need to start tackling these bigger issues.
So yeah, I will agree. I think the issues that we have now, the schools and the property tax issue, are not going to go away. They're going to get more extreme. I think the fights with the cities are going to get more extreme before they get better, because they like the attention they draw. It's a way that they can fight the power in their mind and get a lot of publicity. The papers love those kind of fights. I mean, they just cannot print enough about it. In the longer term, maybe 10 to 15 years down the road, I'll bring up something kind of out of left field. but that I've been doing a little work on lately. The thing that's going to transform cities the most in the next couple decades is autonomous vehicles. Cities have no idea the changes that is going to create for a city in ways that I literally can't even summarize for you. Just think about a few of them. When you don't need parking anymore because the cars just go away. It'll completely change the way we plan cities, the value of land, how you create communities will completely change. Look at the budgets of your police departments and how much is funded through traffic citations, which all go away in one fell swoop. The employment dynamics of having people driving stuff versus not driving stuff anymore. This is going to transform society in ways that we really don't even know, and the really smart people thinking about this are just kind of getting their hands around it. But it is going to be a completely new world. And by the way, the government's the only limiting factor, because I know you read in the paper that we're 15 or 20 years away. The technology is very, very good, but we as humans aren't comfortable with it. We kill 33,000 each other a year on the roads, and we can live with that. But if a computer kills one, we can't live with that. I mean, it's just how we are, right? So, but the technology is going to be here very, very soon. It's already safer than we are, but it has to be 99.99 for anybody to actually let it happen. But anyway, that cities and counties are going to be absolutely changed forever in the way that cell phones changed our lives. It'll remake cities, and almost no attention is being paid to it, and just kind of interesting to me.
Yep. I think you're 100% correct. On that note, folks, please help me thank my great panel.